Hey, welcome back to another episode on the Frozen Assets podcast. This podcast is all about freeze drying entrepreneurship, highlighting companies that are producing products, but also suppliers, manufacturers, everything freeze drying in this business space. It's growing, and we're excited to have someone who's actually starting a business in Canada producing freeze dried pet food and pet treats. And so we're here with Anannya, who is from Toronto, Canada, and she has a company called Farmfetch, and she has some really good, interesting background as to what her fresh product is and why they're going with freeze drying. So, Anannya, thank you for being on the podcast, and we're excited to hear your story of how you got into freeze drying. So, maybe just start there. How did you start getting into one just pet food in general, and then we'll move into the freeze drying part.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And we got into freeze drying as a hobby initially. We bought a home freeze dryer. We started freeze drying snacks like strawberries, and it was really fun doing that because we enjoy going on hikes and taking snacks with us. And at the same time, we were planning this big hike for like 12 hours, and we wanted to take our dog with us. So we thought, okay, because I'm already feeding him gently cooked fresh food at home, and it's super heavy to carry these dog food in your hiking backpacks. So that's when we decided to give it a try and try freeze drying his food and see if it works. The gently cooked version in our little home freeze dryer, and it did really well. And we actually carried it on our hike, and it was super light. And that's how we decided that this could be a product that we could look into doing it in a commercial way.
Now, gently cooked, just from that standpoint alone, without freeze drying, what does gently cooked mean?
Gently cooked means that you don't use any high heat to cook the dog food because high heat destroys the nutrients in the dog food. So we use a steam kettle. So it's mainly water based. It's not boiling, it's lightly steaming the food. And so then it preserves all the nutrients and it's really good for the pets.
Is there specific types of genre of people that want that type of pet food?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we're moving towards food, even whether it's for humans or for your dogs or anyone that's good for you. So anything that doesn't have any fillers or preservatives, it's fresh, it doesn't have any synthetic vitamins and all of that. So I think it's targeted for pet parents who want to feed their dogs super fresh, no preservatives, no fillers, just lightly cooked dog food that's good for them.
Was there a specific moment that you felt that made you realize freeze dried pet food was going to be this answer to an opportunity to grow the business?
Yeah, like when I started the business, it was just, a lot of companies who are doing fresh frozen, which is the format you gently cook it or it's raw, and then you freeze it and you ship it out. And when we started talking to consumers or clients, and we realized that it's good, they really like the food, but the problem is sometimes they forget to thaw it. It's too heavy to carry when they're traveling. It's too expensive because shipping is a lot. And so they were looking for the same format, which is gently cooked, but in a shelf stable format. And so that's when we went back to we freeze dry our little snacks for hiking. We freeze dried Caillou's food a few times. So why don't we try doing this in a much larger scale? So that's when we realized.
Realizing this and then taking those steps is two different things. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you've been working with some other companies to make the freeze-dried product,
Yeah.
kinda prove the concept. How did you even walk us through how you went through to find this company, and was it difficult? And, how did you come to find the person
Yeah.
that was gonna help you?
I mean, it was extremely difficult to find a company in Toronto who would work with a smaller company and do a smaller batch and sort of help us with the process of understanding how to go from like a packaging to delivery and all that stuff, like how to preserve the nutrients, how to formulate the recipes. So we looked for a few companies. And then we found one in Toronto who works with mainly hikers who want to freeze dry their food. So we spoke to them and we explained to them our concept. We want to use our recipes that we're currently doing for the gently cooked dog food, and then we want to freeze dry it so that it's shelf stable. So we did a couple of runs with them. We vacuum sealed our gently cooked food, and then we brought it to them. They freeze it overnight, like for 24 to 48 hours. And then they put it in their trays, they freeze dry it, and they showed it to us. It wasn't working out the first couple of times we tried it. It was either we had to work on the fat content, the water content, the recipes had to be reformulated, a lot of different things. And then I think after the fourth or fifth try, it was starting to work. It was starting to crumble nicely and all that stuff. Then now we did a few batches with them, but it's really difficult because they're still about a 2-hour drive from where we are. So it's not feasible in the longer.
Do you feel like that's a major gap in the industry, especially for
Major gap,
starting out?
yeah. Major gap. And I think it's so easy to find companies that would co-manufacture dehydrated food or fresh frozen food, but it's extremely difficult to find a company that would manufacture freeze-dried food for you, especially at a smaller batch.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I feel is needed for sure, and it's just a matter of time before the industry catches up, and someone will do that. But
Yeah.
it's difficult for producers right now.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's a great opportunity if someone should really take advantage of this and, go for it.
yeah. Now, what's something you learned now going through the process with this that you're like, what was the moment that you said, all right, I've worked with this company, they've done the recipes, but we're going to buy a freeze dryer and start experimenting and learning the skill of our freeze drying our product ourselves?
So actually, it was a little bit of a scary moment, but also a learning moment for us. We when we were using them, some of the products they weren't able to establish how long the products would stay, like what kind of packaging to use in order for the products to not get spoiled. So we were using regular packaging at that point, and then we tried to do a shelf stable test. We saw that some of the products were molding. So when I went back to speak to her, why was this happening? She said, "Oh, this recipe, because of the fat content, it didn't freeze dry it properly." Or it didn't freeze dried equally at that point. And I didn't really understand because I wasn't I was manufacturing the food with her. So I didn't understand why this would happen, why she didn't freeze dry it for longer, or was it my recipe that was the issue? Because I've never faced that with the fresh frozen, which we were already manufacturing in our facility. So I've never faced that. So I wanted to understand, and that's when my husband, who's also my partner, we decided that we need to invest in our own manufacturing for the freeze dryer so that we could understand the process better ourselves.
Yeah, and I'm sure you're gonna learn a lot, like, it's gonna be this,
Yeah,
like, next it's gonna be another level of understanding the industry, but I found that people who actually are doing it themselves, at least at the very beginning with the unit, you really understand what your expectations are for someone who's gonna partner with you, and
right.
so I'm glad you guys are deciding to go that route, at least for, initially, and so kinda my next question leads into that, which is, you were seeing that your product had variances in what it actually ended up being, and you had questions,
Yeah.
but when you actually got the product that you think you want, what do you feel like makes a really good freeze-dried pet food or treat versus just being average?
So the whole process of freeze drying is really interesting. There are different ways you could make a dog food. Like you could do dehydration, air dried, freeze dried. The whole point is that you want a technique that uses the lowest amount of heat, and that is a freeze dryer, which uses the lowest amount of heat, similar to what we do to our fresh frozen, which we use a steam kettle, which uses the lowest amount of heat in order to preserve the most amount of nutrients. So when we decided that that's the route we want to go, we also had to understand how to formulate a recipe that would optimize the freeze dryer to produce the best quality food. So I think two things. In order to make the best pet food, you really have to work on the formulation of the recipe that you're making. And then secondly, you need to understand what technique you're going to use. And for us, it was the freeze dryer that would preserve the most amount of nutrients.
Not to confuse people in terms of like freeze dryers do have a high heat aspect, but it's more of you're using a vacuum
Yeah,
as well as the heat because when
right.
you remove all the moisture through a vacuum, then you're able to heat it up at a hot temperature, but
Yeah,
it won't burn the food. It won't
it won't burn the
do
food. Yeah,
that. Yeah, and that's
yeah,
what's great about freeze-dried pet treats is, like, it's a delicate process for drying out a very, like, rich nutrient-based food.
right. Exactly.
What do you feel like pet owners care most about when they're buying dog food and how that maybe translates to why freeze-drying pet food is taking off?
Yeah, so actually, when we decided to go with freeze dried pet food, we did a survey of about 500 people. And it was really interesting to see. And this was one of the questions on our surveys like, what do you care about the most? And the top three answers were the ingredients that go in the food. Secondly, how easy is it? Like, for them to feed their dog. So they don't want to, they want to feed the best quality food that requires the least amount of effort. And that's where freeze drying comes in. And the third thing, of course, is price, which is a complicated part with freeze drying food.
Yeah, now you're in Canada, I'm in the US. But are pet owners very similar no matter where you're really going across the world? Or do you feel like, Toronto, you're seeing a lot more emphasis in this type of pet food focus in terms of pet owners versus what you see in the US?
I don't have much experience because we don't do any business with the US, but at least in Canada, the pet food industry is very community based. So, it's if it's very much this person said this food is good, so this person will try it and then it goes on from there. But I believe in America, it's a much wider audience and people are open to try different types of food, different types of brands and they take a more higher risk, I think, when it comes to different brands of food.
What's one thing about running a business that has surprised you and maybe actually surprised you about running like this pet food particular business? Have you done a business before?
In terms of running a business, I think the biggest thing is resilience. So you just have to keep going, even if it feels really, really hard or, everything is a no or everything is too expensive or too hard or you have another job or anything. But it's just you have to keep going if you believe in the product. And so, in terms of the pet food industry, what surprised me is that people really give you a chance. Like, if it's not like any other product, but if any other industry, but in the pet food industry, they really want to give you a chance because I think people really crave for that fresh, like, filler free, preservative free. So they wanna believe that they can get a good quality food, then they'll give you a chance.
I'm not a pet owner. I have had pets in the past just
No,
with family. My wife wants a pet, so we're
you
on.
have to get one.
I know. We're on target for a dog sometime in the next year or 2.
Wow, okay.
Yes, but I know how passionate people are about their pets and that it's very important for them, especially right now. We're all looking at what we process in our bodies, and then now it's kinda like with the dog too, it's
Yeah,
part of their extension of their family. It's like, if I wanna eat better, I want my dog to eat better so it lasts longer in the family. Like, like, I want my pet to live as long as possible. I want it to be able to run and be happy and all that type of stuff. And it is, you are what you eat. And that's what people care about with their pets. Being in Canada, running a business, now do you have plans to expand to other countries like the US?
yeah, absolutely. I think it would be great to expand in the US, but we really have to understand the distribution channels better first and also understand what cities to target, what kind of food they feed their dogs. There's a lot of research that needs to happen, but I think the freeze drying product itself, it's much easier as a product to export out to the US because it's so lightweight, it's
Yes.
shelf stable. So I think I'm excited to see where it would go once we start it properly.
Yeah. And I mean, Canada's unique in that you guys work within provinces, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you're in Ontario, in Toronto. There's probably plenty of business in Ontario to
Yeah.
start with anyway.
Yeah.
But What is it like going from, selling to in Ontario to then wanting to sell in Alberta or selling into Quebec, something like that across provinces?
Yeah, it's almost like you're going into a completely different market and also different regulations, different label regulations, especially. For example, if you go into Quebec, you have to have the labels also written in French, you know? So there are a lot of different regulations that you have to follow if you're going to from one province to another, for sure.
Now, do you speak French at all?
No, unfortunately. I mean, we all learned it in high school, but unfortunately, because we don't practice it, it didn't work. Yeah.
When you look at your business today,
Yeah.
what feels like the biggest challenge that's keeping you from growing?
One of the biggest thing is I think we need more educators such as yourself in the freeze drying industry itself. So I think people don't at least in Canada, people are not that well aware of the freeze drying process. So I think educators is number one. Secondly, we need more packaging that is made for freeze drying. And it could really impact the quality of the product itself. And we found that to be really difficult to source in Canada locally.
What packaging has failed for you?
Initially, we were just using the regular, uh, just the regular packaging, not mylar packaging that you find. They are not meant for freeze-dried food because it's still fresh food. Still, it's just a little bit processed. So those packaging creates molds in the freeze-drying product. It has to be mylar packaging, and the clients also need to be educated on how to store it. So it needs to be stored in a dark place away from sunlight. It needs to be resealed properly. So now we vacuum seal our packages right now, which is an extra step. It's not needed, but we still do it. And it also needs to be resealable because people don't use it like all of it at once. So you really need to educate them. You have to reseal it properly, store it in a dark place, and use within the months that it says on the package.
Yeah, I know a lot of home freeze drying companies, manufacturers, they give
Yeah.
you like a impulse sealer that
Yeah.
really just seals the glue that's
The
on a
glue.
on
Yeah.
a bag,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it doesn't really it may help with oxygen getting in or out
Yeah.
only unless you really seal that glue well enough,
Yeah.
but it doesn't do anything for the oxygen inside there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a big challenge. I had some actual packaging companies come to the Freeze Dried Summit. Have you heard of the Freeze Dried Summit,
I
the
have.
conference?
I'm actually planning to attend and I'm excited to learn more about it?
Yeah, and we've talked about that a little bit,
Yeah.
but when you think of an in-person event like this, what would actually make something like that valuable for you?
I think as a company starting out in the freeze drying space, I would love to learn about the different types of machines available currently for you. So what I found was that in the commercial space, there's a big gap in price. The starting price could be 40,000 and then it could go up to $1 million. But I don't find a machine that's in between that's suitable for like a smaller level of business starting out. So I want to know if there are companies who are planning to make it like the company that we're currently working with, the Defreeze, they told us they're planning to make a larger machine in the next couple of months. And I would be excited to see what that looks like? But on a still like a smaller commercial level.
Yeah. Yeah, those all those companies will be at the summit. I'm really trying to
Yeah.
organize that to make sure that there's plenty representation, and also it just gives people a chance to talk to most of them are actually owners, it's not
Right.
like these freeze drying companies have hundreds of reps and then, the
Yeah.
the event staff comes to the conferences. It's usually the owners or like the engineers of these freeze dryers that
Yeah.
actually come to these events. So the
Right.
Freeze Dried Summit, I'm excited to hopefully you come
Yeah.
and when you do, I get to meet you. Now, if someone's starting out in the freeze drying business today, what's one mistake that you feel like they should definitely try to avoid?
Couple of things like depending on what they're making, they need to really sit with someone who's an expert in freeze drying to understand how to optimize their recipe so that it suits the freeze dryer and understand how much time it will take to freeze dry like whatever they're making, is it suitable for a freeze dryer or not, and then finally packaging. That's very important. Like they really need to learn. And I think pricing as well. So if they're going to sell the product, they need to understand the electrical consumption of that machine so they could calculate the final retail price of the product that they're selling. So it's a
What's
lot
it?
of education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you feel like is like a hidden cost that you found with starting in freeze drying that you're like, I didn't really expect this to be something I had to calculate into my financials?
Yeah, I would say the electricity cost because in Toronto it's different from the machine is coming from a different city where the estimate that they give us is based on their city. So I think my city's electrical consumption is going to be different. So I think that's a hidden cost that we weren't prepared for initially.
And that's why having a efficient freeze dryer,
Exactly. Yeah.
something that doesn't take too long, but also
Yeah.
is efficient in terms of the ampage that it's gonna use is super
It's really
valuable.
important. It's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. What's one decision, though, early on that you feel like, "I'm really glad I didn't budge on this with my product?"
My setting up in-house manufacturing, I think is like one decision that I'll never regret. And then now going into setting up the freeze drying also in-house, I think manufacturing is the part that I think is the best decision.
Like, looking back on everything that you've built so far, and you've had other businesses in the past 10 years, what do you feel like Farmfetch, the business that you're growing today, has taught you most about yourself?
I think like Farmfetch is a very personal business because it's based out of my relationship with my dog and trying to have give him a healthier lifestyle. So what it has taught me is that I feel like the best businesses come from your own personal problems or anything that you are personally trying to solve. So, and that's how you can become the most passionate about making it successful because you are solving a problem that you want to solve for yourself. And I feel happy that it is the business that I chose to get into right
That's
now.
so true. Like, that's why I'm in this because I kinda have this I started a freeze drying business, doing kind of the basic thing that most people start out with. You do things that are single ingredients like fruit and
Yes.
some candies, things like that. But I found that I really enjoyed understanding what I'm actually doing, and it wasn't something that I ended up scaling the way you're gonna do it, but I really found that once I started doing videos, I really liked connecting with people
Yeah.
and like, the advice that I give you, Ananya, that we
Yeah.
have talked about in the
Yeah.
past, that's only because of the past 3.5 years of me connecting with all these people to say,
Right.
"What have you done that's, worked well? What have you made a mistake with that I can tell other people don't do?" This is just, like has been learned because it's such a new industry for people to get into. Freeze drying has been around for a long time, but it's just
Yeah.
new for people like yourself getting
It's
into.
really important what you're doing. Like educating people about everything that you have learned about freeze drying is so important because it's a new concept still.
I really enjoyed talking to you, and we've been talking with Farm Fetch Pets owner Ananya, and we're really thankful that you came on the podcast to just share kind of where you're at, where you've been, and we're excited that you are hopefully be coming to the Freeze Dried Summit. And if you want to come to the Freeze Dried Summit as a listener, viewer, however you're consuming this podcast, go to freezedriedsummit.com. There's still tickets available. It's happening every September, the third week of September. You can immerse yourself in everything freeze drying, especially if you're starting a business. And we hope to see you there. Thanks, Ananya.
Thank you so much.